Tom Oar finally breaks the silence. After years of whispers and message board theories, the truth steps into the light. And it's not what most fans expected. The mountain men's star's journey has taken turns few could have predicted, and the confirmation from his wife Nancy changes how we see his rustic legacy. Join us as we trace how we got here. But before we get to the truth, we have to go back to where it all began. Long before the cameras of mountain men captured his leather crafting and wilderness survival skills, Tom Oar was just a young boy with calloused hands and determined eyes. Born in Illinois in 1943, Tom grew up with an innate connection to the outdoors that seemed almost preternatural. His father, a rodeo rider, instilled in him not just a love of nature, but a fierce independence that would define his entire life. As a child, Tom would disappear into the woods for hours, returning with detailed knowledge of animal tracks and wild edibles that surprised even the adults around him. "I was never afraid of being alone out there," he reportedly told a local newspaper years later. "The forest made more sense to me than town ever did." That comfort with solitude would prove prophetic. The Illinois countryside of Tom's youth was still wild enough to nurture his growing fascination with self-reliance. Neighbors recall a serious boy who seemed older than his years, watching and learning with uncommon patience. He would sit for hours observing animal behavior, developing the tracking skills that would later serve him so well in Montana's unforgiving wilderness. By his teenage years, Tom had already begun to show the resourcefulness that would later captivate television audiences. He built his first canoe at 14, crafted from materials he'd gathered himself. The precision of his work spoke to something deeper, a patience that couldn't be taught, only lived. School was never Tom's passion, according to childhood friends. His true education came from the land. From understanding weather patterns, from knowing which plants healed and which harmed, from reading the stories written in mud and snow, by passing wildlife. He could tell you where a deer had gone 3 days ago just by looking at broken twigs, one childhood acquaintance reportedly remembered. It wasn't showing off. It was just how he saw the world. But here's the truth. Tom's path wasn't always aimed toward the remote Montana wilderness, where fans would eventually discover him. Before any of the headlines, there was a kid with rodeo dreams flowing through his veins. Following in his father's footsteps, Tom entered the professional rodeo circuit as a bronc rider in his early 20s. For 16 years, he traveled the country, testing his limits against some of the most powerful animals on the circuit. The life was grueling. Broken bones, concussions, and the constant movement from town to town. The rodeo years shaped Tom in ways that would later serve him well in his mountain life. He learned to endure physical hardship without complaint. He developed the mechanical skills needed to maintain equipment far from any repair shop. And perhaps most importantly, he cultivated the mental toughness required to face danger with a clear head. It was during this chapter that he met Nancy, the woman who would become not just his wife, but his partner in the wilderness journey to come. According to those who knew them in those early days, their connection was immediate and profound. Nancy understood something essential about Tom, that beneath the rodeo showmanship was a man searching for something authentic. "The rodeo life takes everything from you eventually," Tom reportedly told a friend. "Your body can only take so many falls." Those who remember Tom from the rodeo days describe a competitor who wasn't the most naturally talented, but who studied the animals with an intensity others lacked. He approached bronc riding not as a battle, but as a dance with a powerful partner. This mindset, working with nature rather than against it, would become the philosophy that guided his later years. And that's when the whispers started. After a particularly brutal injury in his late 30s, Tom began talking about walking away, not just from rodeo, but from conventional society altogether. Nancy, according to friends from that era, didn't balk at the idea. She'd grown disenchanted with the constant travel and the toll the rodeo life was taking on Tom's body. She reportedly told a friend, "I'd rather have fewer years with a whole Tom than many years with a broken one." The dream of a different life began to take shape between them. Quiet conversations about mountains and self-sufficiency, about living by their own hands and their own rules. For a couple raised in more conventional surroundings, the vision was both terrifying and exhilarating. Then everything changed. In the late 1980s, Tom and Nancy made the decision that would eventually lead them to television fame, though they couldn't have known it at the time. They packed up their lives and moved to the remote Yaak Valley in northwestern Montana, nearly 50 miles from the nearest town. The journey itself was a leap of faith. According to local accounts, they arrived with limited savings and unlimited determination. The property they purchased was beautiful but unforgiving. Dense forest, harsh winters, and wildlife that viewed humans as intruders rather than masters. Their new home was a hand-built log cabin without electricity or running water. To most, it would seem like deprivation. To Tom, it was finally living by his own terms. "We wanted to see if we could do it," Nancy has been quoted as saying, "to live completely by our own hands." And they did. For nearly 3 decades before the History Channel discovered them, the Oars crafted a life of self-sufficiency that few modern Americans could comprehend. Tom became a master tanner and leather worker, creating buckskin clothing, using techniques handed down through generations. Nancy learned to garden in the harsh Montana climate, preserving food to last through brutal winters. Those first years were the hardest. According to neighbors, distant as they were, the Oars faced challenges that would have sent most people packing for civilization. A particularly severe winter reportedly left them snowbound for weeks. Their initial attempts at growing food in Montana's short growing season yielded disappointing results. And the learning curve for true self-sufficiency proved steeper than they had anticipated. But they persisted, they adapted, they learned. The mountain doesn't care if you're tired or discouraged, Tom reportedly told a visitor years later. It just is what it is, and you either figure it out or you leave. They figured it out. Tom's leatherworking skills improved from functional to artistic. Nancy mastered the art of food preservation through trial and error. They developed systems for everything from water collection to winter heating that allowed them not just to survive, but to thrive in their chosen isolation. On camera, it looked easy. Off camera, not even close. When Mountain Men premiered in 2012, viewers were immediately drawn to Tom's quiet competence and weathered wisdom. The camera loved the visual of the white-bearded mountain man working leather with tools he'd made himself, speaking in that unhurried cadence about survival and tradition. The show portrayed the Oars as the real deal, authentic wilderness dwellers who had chosen a lifestyle most modern Americans couldn't fathom. And in many ways, that portrayal was accurate. They really did live miles from the nearest neighbor. They really did hunt and forage for much of their food. Tom really did create beautiful buckskin clothing using traditional methods. But here's where it gets complicated. The Tom Oar that viewers fell in love with was authentic, but television requires narratives, and narratives require drama. According to production insiders, filming days were long and sometimes required multiple takes of activities Tom had been doing effortlessly for decades. It's strange to do something you've done 10,000 times while someone tells you to do it slightly differently for the camera, a crew member recalls Tom saying. The physical demands of his lifestyle were real. The threat of predators was real. The harsh winters were unquestionably real. But the compressed timeline of television sometimes made everyday challenges look like life or death situations. A season's worth of wilderness life had to be captured in a few intensive weeks of filming. Challenges that the Oars had learned to take in stride. A snowstorm, a bear sighting, a damaged roof became dramatic focal points when viewed through the lens of television production. Behind the cameras, the story was different. Tom's leatherworking business had actually been quite successful before the show, with orders coming in from across the country. His isolation, while genuine, wasn't quite as complete as viewers might have imagined. The Oars had neighbors. Distant ones, but neighbors nonetheless. And contrary to the show's suggestion that they were completely off the grid, the couple did occasionally make the long journey into town for supplies and socializing. They weren't hermits, just people who had chosen a more deliberate relationship with modern convenience. But Tom never complained. By all accounts, he approached his unexpected late-life fame with the same steady temperament he brought to tanning hides or tracking elk. "It's just another season," he reportedly told a crew member when asked about the show's success. "Everything has its time, and then you move on to what's next." The show brought changes, of course. The Oars' previously quiet existence now included film crews and production schedules. Their private wilderness home became a setting familiar to millions of viewers. And Tom himself became something he'd never sought to be, a celebrity, albeit an unlikely one. For a man who had spent decades seeking authenticity away from society's spotlight, the irony couldn't have been lost on him. Yet according to those who worked with him, Tom found a way to compartmentalize the experience, to be fully present for filming while maintaining his true life apart from the cameras. Now, if you're wondering whether Tom truly faced the dangers portrayed on screen, here's what we know. The threats of the wilderness were very real, but according to Nancy, Tom's experience meant he rarely found himself in the kind of peril the show sometimes suggested. After 40 years in the woods, you develop a sixth sense, Nancy reportedly told a friend. Tom can smell a storm coming before the clouds gather. He knows which ice will hold and which won't by the sound it makes under his feet. That hard-earned wisdom didn't always translate to dramatic television. And so, according to production sources, there were times when scenarios were presented as more dangerous or urgent than they actually were in the Oars' day-to-day experience. A beaver dam that had been slowly eroding for months might be framed as a sudden emergency. A routine check of trap lines might be portrayed as a desperate search for food. The eternal challenge of Montana winters, a reality the Oars had faced for decades, became a season-by-season battle for survival in the show's narrative. Yet through it all, viewers connected with something undeniably real in Tom, a man who had chosen his path deliberately and walked it with integrity. The knowledge he shared on screen was genuine, even if the packaging sometimes wasn't. As Mountain Men's popularity grew, so did the online speculation about the Oars. Were they really as isolated as they seemed? Was Tom's health failing? Were they actually planning to leave their beloved Yaak Valley? The whispers gathered momentum with each passing season. Forums lit up with theories. Social media became a breeding ground for rumors. Some claimed Tom was in poor health. Others insisted the couple was being forced out of their home by encroaching development. There were posts suggesting they had secretly moved to Florida. Each new episode seemed to fuel fresh speculation. Tom Oar gravely ill, read one clickbait headline around 2015, offering no evidence beyond the observation that he appeared tired in a recent episode. Mountain Men Star Forced Offland claimed another conflating development pressures in the broader region with the Oars' specific situation. The most persistent rumors centered around Tom's age and health. As viewers watched him tackle strenuous physical tasks season after season, concern began to grow. Was the show pushing him too hard? Were the producers exploiting an elderly man for ratings? Online commenters analyzed his gait, his breathing, the lines on his face, searching for evidence of decline. Did you notice how he struggled with that log in episode 3? One would ask. He's not the same as he was in season 1. Another would reply. The parasocial relationship between viewers and the mountain man they'd never met created a strange dynamic of distant concern. Some fans expressed worry that the show's demands were accelerating any health issues Tom might be facing. "They need to let him retire" became a common refrain in comment sections, as if the decision were in anyone's hands but Tom and Nancy's own. By 2016, the whispers had become impossible to ignore. Online publications began reporting that Tom and Nancy were considering retirement from both the show and their mountain lifestyle. According to these reports, the physical demands of their lifestyle were becoming too much as they aged into their 70s. The speculation reached a fever pitch when Tom was reportedly quoted saying he and Nancy were getting too old for this. The context was unclear, but fans took it as confirmation that an era was ending. Then came the rumors of a move to Florida, about as far from the Montana wilderness as one could imagine, both geographically and philosophically. The idea of Tom Oar, the quintessential mountain man, living in a retirement community became almost a joke in some circles. But was there truth to it? Some fans defended his right to choose his own path, wherever it led. He's earned a comfortable retirement, they argued. Others seemed almost personally betrayed by the idea. The real Tom would never leave the mountains, they insisted, as if they knew better than the man himself what constituted authenticity. The dialogue around the Oars' future became less about their actual well-being and more about what they represented to different audiences, a symbol of disappearing self-reliance, a rebuke to modern softness, a romantic ideal of wilderness living that few would actually choose to emulate. Through it all, Tom and Nancy themselves said very little publicly. Their limited social media presence offered few clues. The show continued to present them as deeply rooted in their mountain lifestyle, even as rumors of change swirled around them. Let's be clear about what's confirmed and what isn't. In a rare interview with Outdoor Life magazine in early 2023, Nancy Oar finally addressed the swirling rumors about their life after mountain men. According to the publication, Nancy confirmed that she and Tom had indeed made the difficult decision to leave their beloved Yaak Valley home after nearly 40 years. "The winters got harder as we got older," Nancy reportedly said. "There comes a point where you have to be realistic about what your body can handle." She described the decision as bittersweet, but necessary. According to the interview, Tom had experienced several falls on the ice in recent winters. The remote location meant medical help was hours away, a risk that had seemed acceptable in their younger years but had become increasingly concerning as they aged. "We loved that land with everything in us," Nancy was quoted as saying. "But love doesn't keep you warm when it's 40 below and the woodpile looks smaller every day." She confirmed that they had relocated, not to Florida as rumored, but to a smaller property in northwestern Montana, closer to medical facilities, but still surrounded by the wilderness Tom loves. The move happened gradually, according to Nancy, with the couple splitting their time between locations before making the permanent change. Their new home reportedly sits on several acres of wooded land, not the vast wilderness of the Yaak Valley, but enough space to maintain their connection to nature. They now have electricity and running water, conveniences that Nancy admitted were welcome changes after decades without them. "Tom still spends most daylight hours outside," she reportedly said. "He just comes home to a warm shower now instead of heating water on the wood stove." As for Tom's health, Nancy was protective but candid. She reportedly stated that while Tom has experienced the expected challenges of aging, reports of serious illness had been greatly exaggerated. "Tom gets up every morning and works with his hands," she was quoted as saying. "That hasn't changed and won't change until he physically can't do it anymore." She addressed specific health rumors directly, reportedly stating that contrary to online speculation, Tom had not suffered a stroke or been diagnosed with any terminal illness. The couple had simply made the practical decision that many aging people make, to simplify their lives and move closer to resources they might need. Regarding their departure from the show, Nancy confirmed what many had suspected, that the decision had been mutual between the Oars and the production company. After appearing in the first several seasons, the physical demands of filming combined with the increasing intrusion on their privacy had become too much. "We're grateful for the experience," Nancy reportedly said, "but there came a point where we had to choose between living our life and showing our life." According to the interview, the production schedule had become increasingly difficult to manage as Tom and Nancy aged. What had once been an interesting diversion from their routine had gradually become a burden. The constant presence of crews, the repetition of tasks for different camera angles, the compression of natural processes into television-friendly timeframes, all of it had taken a toll. "Tom was never comfortable being called a star," Nancy reportedly said. "He's just a man who lives the way he chooses to live." The cameras complicated that. She also addressed the financial rumors, stating that while the show had provided welcome income, reports of huge paydays were exaggerated. According to Nancy, they had lived modestly before Mountain Men and continued to do so after. "The show helped us prepare for this next chapter," she was quoted as saying. "We're grateful for that, but we didn't do it for money, and we didn't leave because of money." Perhaps most significantly, Nancy confirmed that Tom continues to practice his leather working, creating buckskin clothing and accessories on a smaller scale. "His hands won't stop moving as long as his heart's still beating," she reportedly said. She described a workshop Tom had built on their new property, smaller than his Yaak Valley setup, but equipped with all the tools and materials he needs to continue his craft. According to Nancy, he still rises early each morning and spends hours working with leather, finding the same meditative focus in the work that has centered him for decades. Some men retire to golf, Nancy reportedly said. Tom retires to his workshop. It's where he finds his peace. These confirmations came as both a relief and a disappointment to the show's dedicated fan base. While many were happy to hear that the Oars were well and still connected to the lifestyle they'd championed, others struggled with the reality that one of television's most authentic wilderness experiences had come to an end. Online reaction ranged from supportive to skeptical. Longtime fans posted messages of appreciation, thanking the Oars for sharing their unique lifestyle with the world. "Tom taught me to slow down and appreciate craftsmanship," wrote one supporter on a Mountain Men fan page. "I'll never forget the lessons." Others expressed understanding about the couple's decision to move closer to services as they aged. "My grandparents did the same thing," one commenter noted. "There's no shame in acknowledging your limitations." But there were also voices of disappointment and even anger. Some accused the Oars of selling out or abandoning the principles they had espoused on the show. "So much for all that talk about self-reliance," wrote one particularly harsh critic. Such comments revealed more about the commenters' projections than about the Oars themselves. Others questioned whether the real story was being told, suggesting that perhaps the History Channel had pushed the couple out, or that Tom's health situations were being downplayed. In the absence of regular updates, speculation continued to fill the void. Some fans couldn't reconcile the move with the Tom Oar they thought they knew. "The real Tom would never leave the yacht," insisted one commenter, seemingly unaware of the presumption in such a statement. The parasocial relationship between viewers and the Mountain Man had created a sense of ownership that no real relationship would sustain. Media coverage was respectful but limited. Unlike more publicity-seeking reality stars, the Oars had always maintained a certain distance from the celebrity aspects of their television appearance. This continued as they transitioned away from the show, with few formal interviews or public statements. Local Montana publications offered the most nuanced coverage, understanding as they did the realities of aging in remote areas. "Oars make sensible transition," read one headline, a far cry from the sensationalized reports on some fan sites and social media platforms. Perhaps most poignantly, leatherworkers and traditional craftspeople across the country expressed how Tom's visibility had helped their own businesses flourish. By showcasing these disappearing skills on national television, he had inadvertently sparked renewed interest in traditional crafts. "Before Tom Oar, I couldn't give leather demonstrations away," one craftsman told a regional newspaper. "After Mountain Men, I had waiting lists for classes." He reminded people why handmade matters. This legacy, the revival of interest in traditional skills and craftsmanship, may ultimately prove more significant than the entertainment value of the show itself. In a world increasingly dominated by digital experiences, Tom's tangible physical work with natural materials represented something many viewers didn't know they were missing. Have you ever noticed how quickly misinformation spreads when it involves someone who isn't constantly on social media and setting the record straight? Despite Nancy's confirmations, misconceptions about the Oars persist. No, Tom is not living in Florida, though the couple has reportedly visited warmer climates during particularly harsh Montana winters. No, he did not have a terminal illness, as some dramatic headlines suggested. Yes, they did leave their original Yacht Valley cabin, but no, they didn't abandon the Montana wilderness entirely. One persistent rumor claimed the Oars had been forced to move because of encroaching development in the Yacht Valley. According to regional land use reports, while some areas of the valley have seen increased human presence, the Oars' decision was based primarily on their own needs rather than external pressures. Another misconception suggested that Tom had given up his traditional skills entirely. Nancy's interview made it clear that while the scale might have changed, his dedication to leatherworking remained unchanged. The hands that had crafted thousands of pieces over the decades were still active, still creating, still finding meaning in the ancient dialogue between craftsman and material. Perhaps the biggest misconception involves their relationship with Mountain Men itself. While online rumors suggested bitter disputes with producers, Nancy's comments indicate the separation was amicable and mutual. The reality seems to be what it often is, more nuanced than either extreme. "We're still in touch with some of the crew," Nancy reportedly said. "They became like family during those years. We just needed to step back from the process itself. Another clarification involves the Oars' supposed isolation. While their Yaak Valley home was indeed remote by modern standards, they were never completely cut off from civilization. They made trips to town for supplies they couldn't produce themselves. They had a workshop where Tom filled mail orders for his leatherwork. The romantic notion of total separation from society was always somewhat exaggerated. We chose a different lifestyle, not a complete rejection of the modern world, Nancy was quoted as saying. We've always had one foot in each world. That's how we've survived as long as we have. As for those persistent rumors about Tom's rodeo career, yes, he really did ride professionally for 16 years. That part of his story, often questioned by skeptics, has been documented through Rodeo Association records and contemporaneous accounts. He wasn't the most famous rider on the circuit, one former competitor reportedly said, but he was respected for his grit. He'd get back on after falls that would have sent other men to the hospital. The wilderness skills displayed on the show, according to those who know him best, those were genuine. While television necessarily compresses time and heightens drama, Tom's abilities as a tracker, hunter, and craftsman were hard-earned through decades of practical experience. He can read the land like most people read a book, one longtime friend told a local reporter. That's not something you can fake for television. Either you have those skills or you don't. Today, according to Nancy's recent statements, Tom continues to work with leather, though at a pace better suited to a man in his late 70s. Their new home, while more accessible than the remote Yaak Valley cabin, still sits on enough land for Tom to wander the woods he loves. The property reportedly includes several acres of forest, allowing Tom to continue the daily walks that have been part of his routine for decades. According to Nancy, he still tracks animals for the pure pleasure of reading the story of their movements, though he rarely hunts these days. Their days reportedly follow a rhythm not so different from their television portrayal, rising with the sun, working with their hands, and living close to the land. The main difference, according to Nancy, is the welcome absence of camera crews and production schedules. Tom is where he needs to be. Nancy was quoted as saying, "Still in Montana, still working leather, still watching the seasons change." The workshop Tom built on their new property has become his primary domain. According to Nancy, he spends hours there each day, the radio tuned to the same station he's listened to for years, his hands moving through the familiar motions of cutting, treating, and stitching leather. The work centers him, she reportedly said. Always has. I can always tell when he's had a good day in the shop. There's a peace about him that nothing else brings. They maintain their privacy carefully, making public appearances only rarely and selectively. According to local reports, Tom occasionally demonstrates traditional leatherworking techniques at regional craft fairs, a nod to his belief in passing these skills to younger generations. He's more teacher than performer now, one fair organizer was quoted as saying. He doesn't want applause. He wants to see young hands learning the old ways. Their children and grandchildren visit regularly, learning the traditional skills that define the Oars' television presence. In this way, the legacy continues even without the cameras rolling. The grandkids love to work with him in the shop, Nancy reportedly said. He has endless patience with them, more than he ever had with the camera crews. She added, with what the interviewer described as a knowing smile. Despite stepping back from public life, the Oars reportedly maintain connections with some former Mountain Men cast members. The bonds formed through their shared experiences on the show have endured beyond the final episodes. According to regional news sources, several cast members have visited the Oars at their new home. These quieter relationships away from the spotlight of television production seem to better suit Tom and Nancy's natural inclinations toward privacy and genuine connection. Those men understand each other in a way most people don't, Nancy reportedly said of Tom's friendships with other Mountain Men cast members. They don't need to explain themselves to each other. What does Tom Oar's journey teach us about authenticity in an increasingly artificial world? In many ways, Tom represents something our modern society both romanticizes and struggles to understand. A life defined by tangible skills and direct connection to the natural world. In an era where most of us are increasingly separated from the sources of our food, our clothing, and our shelter, Tom's hands-on existence feels both foreign and deeply appealing. His life reminds us that before there were influencers, there were practitioners, people who did things not to be seen doing them, but because the doing itself held meaning. Tom didn't set out to become a symbol of traditional manhood or wilderness self-reliance. He simply lived according to values he found meaningful, and the world eventually took notice. His story reminds us that television, even reality television, is always an interpretation rather than a direct window. The Tom Oar of Mountain Men was real, but necessarily edited, framed, and narratively shaped. The man himself, complex, skilled, and private, always existed beyond what the camera could capture. This isn't to diminish the value of what viewers saw. The skills were real. The lifestyle was genuine. The philosophy that guided Tom's choices was authentic, but the complete picture of any human life exceeds what can be captured in weekly episodes, no matter how well-intentioned the production. Perhaps most importantly, the Oars' journey demonstrates the courage to change course when circumstances demand it. After decades in one of America's most remote regions, their decision to move closer to resources as they aged wasn't an abandonment of their values, but an evolution of them. True self-reliance includes knowing when to adapt. The mountain taught us when to stand firm and when to bend, Nancy reportedly said. Those who don't learn that lesson don't last long in the wilderness. There's wisdom in that perspective that extends far beyond wilderness living. Knowing when to hold fast to principles and when to adapt to changing circumstances is a balance many of us struggle to find in our own lives. The Oars' journey offers a template not of rigid ideological purity, but of thoughtful adaptation guided by core values. Remember that young boy in Illinois disappearing into the woods for hours at a time. That same curiosity and connection to nature remained constant through rodeo arenas, television fame, and now, a quieter chapter closer to civilization's amenities. The through line in Tom's life has never been the specific location or circumstance, but rather the approach, the patient attention to detail, the respect for natural materials and processes, the valuing of skill and craft over convenience. Those principles have remained consistent even as the external details of his life have changed. The skills Tom championed, leatherworking, tracking, wilderness survival, connect to something primal in our collective history. In preserving and practicing these traditional crafts, he became more than just an entertaining television character. He became a living link to ways of knowing and being that our technological society is in danger of forgetting entirely. In a world increasingly mediated through screens, Tom's direct engagement with the physical world resonates as a kind of antidote. His hands know textures that most of us will never experience, the particular give of well-tanned hide, the subtle differences between animal tracks in varying soil conditions, the exact tension needed to set a proper trap. Those calloused hands that first learned to craft leather decades ago still tell his story better than words ever could. They speak to work that is necessary, tangible, and deeply connected to the natural world, a counterpoint to our increasingly virtual existence. And perhaps there's a final lesson in the Oars' decision to step back from public view. In choosing privacy over continued exposure, they demonstrated the same values that had drawn viewers to them in the first place: authenticity, independence, and the courage to live by their own measure rather than external validation. The wilderness, Tom often said on the show, doesn't care about your intentions, only your actions. Perhaps that philosophy extends beyond survival skills to life itself. In the end, we're all judged not by what we say, but by what we do, by the marks our hands leave on the world. Tom's hands have left their mark on leather transformed into functional art, on a remote piece of Montana wilderness shaped by decades of mindful habitation, and on the many viewers who found in his example an inspiration to live more deliberately, whatever their circumstances. If Tom and Nancy's story has meant something to you over the years, I'd love to hear what moments stood out. Maybe it was a particular skill Tom demonstrated that inspired you to try something with your own hands. Perhaps it was the quiet partnership between him and Nancy that spoke to you about what really matters in a relationship. Share one specific memory in the comments, the scene you rewound to watch again, or the piece of wisdom that stayed with you long after the episode ended. Let's create a space where their legacy of craftsmanship and intentional living continues to inspire. Was it the way he approached a skittish horse with that same patience he brought to tanning a hide? Or maybe how he and Nancy worked together through Montana's brutal winters, finding warmth in partnership when the temperature dropped far below zero. These moments of authentic living, captured between the more dramatic arcs of television storytelling, often hold the most lasting value. Mountain Men introduced us to a man who lived deliberately, with calloused hands and clear eyes. Though the cameras have moved on, the lessons remain about patience, about skill, about knowing when to persist and when to adapt. In a world that moves ever faster, perhaps that's the most valuable survival skill of all. In confirming the changes in their lives, Nancy Oar hasn't diminished her husband's legacy. She's simply completed the story, showing us that even icons of self-reliance ultimately face the same human realities we all do. And in facing those realities with grace and adaptability, Tom and Nancy may have taught their most important lesson of all.